warm welcome everyone to today's event, Anger, Rage and Relationship with Sue Parker Hall. Sue, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm delighted to, really delighted. Yeah, thank you.
It's great to have you here with us, and it's great to have everyone who's watching us live online. There's already loads of people viewing on the website, lots of people in the chat room, and Sue, I know you're really hoping you're going to get lots of questions and comments, so we're really interactive.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so feel free to use the chat room, everyone, and if you do want to make a comment or a question for Sue, we both can see the chat room, and so we'll hopefully have them in our conversation, which would be great. Yeah. Sue, before we get started, I'd just like to ask you if you can give us a sense of where you're located, what your geography is.
Yeah, I'm in Cornwall, West Cornwall, near Hale. Godrevy Lighthouse is my nearest beach, so that's where 6 miles of golden sands, just giving the place a plug if anybody wants to come on holiday in Hale.
It sounds fantastic, Sue. Living near lighthouses and golden sands.
Yeah.
Sounds really great. Yeah. I'm just thinking you do some of your work down there, don't you? And out and about with clients, it must be a really fantastic environment to work in.
I think it can be a very healing environment. You know, the coast and the sea, and people are becoming much more aware, aren't they, now, of how the environment can support our, well-being, with the emergence of ecotherapy. And yes, I do think it's a wonderful place to live. Yeah, and lovely to raise children. I've really enjoyed raising my children on the beach. I mean, they did go to school and stuff like that as well. But
okay, yes. Thanks for that clarification, Sue. Yes, but there's something about that environment that's been great for your family. It's great for your work, and sounds fab. Yeah.
Yes,
well,
it is.
I mean, you've been doing your work around anger and rage and relationship for a little while now. Could you give us a sense of that journey, Sue? Would that be okay?
Yeah, for sure. Yes, I suppose my interests began in about 1995. My first placement was in a women's refuge, and I was really curious because most of the clients I worked with weren't connected to anger, and I was listening to their stories and feeling enraged, but there was no sign of any anger in them, and that's what sparked my interest. It was the absence of anger, rather than the presence of it, and just got me thinking, well, where is it then, and what happens to it, if people aren't connected to it.
So you kind of noticed that missing in the work then? Yeah.
Yes, and I began to get a sense of how important anger is, really, how it supports us in so many ways, and just how damaging to our self-esteem and also to our security and safety in relationships if it's absent. So that was where I started. And then, because domestic abuse work is always multi-agency, I often got referrals for perpetrators. I go like that because I just hate that phrase. And I began working with them and was astonished to find that when I looked at the intake sheets, when I did the history taking, if you covered up gender and you covered up names, their histories were very, very similar in terms of early trauma. And that really, really got my interest in terms of linking rage with early trauma and looking at it through a developmental lens, if you like. So that's the kind of origins of it.
Sounds really interesting, that connection with trauma, and whether someone is in the perpetrator role, and I can see you doing the inverted commas because I know that's not a label that it sits comfortably. I mean,
I suppose if I can take a minute or two to get on my soapbox, I'm very passionate about the idea that, the majority of domestic abuse is co-created. If we look at the facts, if we look at the research, 86% of it is co-created. This idea that there's a male terrorist perpetrator is a stereotype, and it's emerged from one particular origin, i.e. a single murder in Duluth in America, in Minnesota. There was a particularly nasty murder where a husband murdered his wife, and they analysed the statistics of it, and that single murder has been extrapolated, if that's the right word, has been extended to cover all events of domestic violence. They're saying that it's the same dynamics, and that's where the Duluth model comes from, that the probation service use, that the prison service have recently said they're going to stop using, because they said it's too focused on power and control and not enough on more personal development, personal growth. But so that gets my goat a bit, that actually only 3% of the population are this patriarchal terrorist stereotype, and most of it is co-created. And just one more thing, gay relationships have an equivalent rate of domestic abuse in them, and lesbian relationships, it's been shown, are more aggressive than hetero or gay relationships. So it kind of blows that stereotype out of the water. So I don't like the word perpetrator, I must say.
Yes, well, I really appreciate the context to what that label does in terms of your thinking, and I guess what you're introducing us to, and you do in your work, so which is really powerful, which is a whole different way of looking at domestic violence, I guess, from what has become the norm in terms, or the normal narrative around domestic violence.
Yes, the kind of mainstream way of looking at it is that it's an issue of power and control, and that's all it is. And I'd say yes, power and control is a symptom, but people who are in a rage are feel in a desperately unsafe environment, and that's why the controlling comes into play. It is to do with feeling terrifyingly unsafe. That's a more kind of compassionate understanding of it. That's not to excuse violence, or condone it in any way, but how we define rage and rage behaviours, has a consequence for how we work with rage. So if we see it as power and control, then we work with it in terms of, I think we work with it in terms of willpower, and asking people to restrain their willpower. And, I hate to say this, and a lot of helping professionals don't like to hear it, but we have no conscious control over rage, none whatsoever. We can try all the cognitive tricks in the world. We can make decisions to change our behaviour, and we can do it briefly, but we can't sustain it under stress. We can't sustain it. It has a place in risk management. If people can curtail some of their behaviours and don't hurt themselves or others, then it's really valuable. But don't let us think that